Hello, everyone. Sodawada, welcome to the third Plurilingual Lab speaker series this fall. I'm your host, Aisha Barise. I'm a PhD student in Educational Studies and Language Acquisition at McGill University. I would like to begin with my sincerest gratitude and appreciation to the Center of the Study of Learning and Performance for kindly sponsoring this event, this speaker series, and the Belonging, Identity, Language, and Diversity Research Group and McGill's Faculty Education for supporting this event. To begin, I would like to acknowledge the diverse Indigenous people whose presence mark the territory of Turtle Island, also known as Canada, where people of the world now gather. It is important to recognize and acknowledge the detrimental effects that settler colonialism has had on Indigenous peoples to this day, and how we can commit to support the Indigenous people of Turtle Island. I live in Chachage, also known as Montreal, which is historically known as a gathering place of the people, including Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabeg's Nation. I would like to invite you to acknowledge the lands of the Indigenous peoples where you are today. And if you can include that in the chat, I would also like to invite you to think about the commitments to respect, support, and advancement of the traditions, languages, and cultures of Indigenous peoples around the world, and the actions that we can take as a part of reconciliation efforts. So to begin, this speaker series is a panel presentation of the book launch, Critical Action Research, Challenging Neoliberal Language and Literacies Education. In this panel presentation, the co-editors and the chapter contributors will discuss their work. It is my great pleasure to introduce our speaker panelists today. So to begin with the three co-editors, Dr. Antoinette Gagné, professor at the University of Toronto. And second, Dr. Amir Kalan, an assistant professor at the Department of Integrated Studies and Education at McGill University. And Dr. Shreemali Herath, an assistant professor attached to the Faculty of Education at the University of Manitoba. And the chapter contributors, Dr. Marlon Valencia, an assistant professor in the Department of English at Glendon College, York University in Canada. Dr. Haejing Song, an assistant professor at the Department of Languages, Literacies, and Linguistics in York University. Dr. John Mikogi is a lead instructor in the International Foundation Program at University of Toronto. And Dr. Monica Shanklo is a PhD candidate in Language and Literacy Education in the University of British Columbia. And Dr. Andrés Valencia, an assistant professor at the Escuela de Ciencias de Lenguaje at the Universidad del Valle in Cali, Colombia. And Mama Niuowo is a PhD candidate in Language and Literacies and Education and Comparative International Development Education in University of Toronto's Ontario Institute for Studies in Education. So first off, before we get started.
Sorry, Aisha, we just have one more presenter, Claudio Yaramillo, who is also a doctoral candidate at OISE at the University of Toronto.
Pardon me, excuse me, I missed that name. Sorry about that, Claudia. And so before we get started, I would like to go over the Zoom etiquette. So please, during the talk, keep your video and sound off, and you can react, but such as clapping and thumbs up features. Note that the talk is being recorded and will be available in the Plurilingual Lab YouTube channel. And after the talk, we're going to have a 30-minute discussion moderated by Li Peng. At this time, you're welcome to post your questions in the chat and unmute yourself, and you can ask questions by then. And that covers it. And I will hand over the floor to the panelists. You can go ahead and unmute yourselves now and turn your cameras off.
All right. Hello, all. I'm so excited that you've been able to join us from so many different parts of the world, and also to see so many wonderful colleagues joining us from different parts of Canada as well. We have a plan for you that involves sharing initially a little bit about the book and the authors, then looking at the robust concepts that underpin the entire book. We'll have a few author mini presentations, which are quite informal, an interlude where we'll be able to respond to each other, make some connections, and then a few more mini presentations, another brief interlude, and some concluding comments. We have a website that you can visit. We've just recently launched it. It's an updated website of our network of critical action research and education. We've been a community since 2014, and the book we're sharing with you today is based on several of the projects that different community members have undertaken over the years. This community is growing, so please find out more about it by visiting the site, and you're most welcome to join us. We also have a YouTube channel, and you can find a growing number of videos there that connect to the work of different community members. We are a very international group, and to give you a sense of where we are all from as authors, we have a map here, and in some cases, our work is not necessarily located in the country where we find ourselves working professionally in our regular jobs. So today you'll have a chance to meet quite a number of these wonderful authors who will introduce themselves as they present. Our book is organized thematically. We have some research that connects to teacher education. Some of the projects are taking place in university or college language-related programs. We also have school-based research in elementary and secondary schools. And finally, a number of the projects that are reported in the book take place in the community. The first chapter is a trio ethnography that we co-wrote as editors of the book. And each of us will take this moment to introduce the three themes that animate our conversation in this introductory chapter. I'm going to focus on what is meant by critical action research. I think I need more than 2 minutes, but I'm going to try to encapsulate this for you, and hope that you will consider reading more to learn about how you can carry out critical action research. We found in our readings that there were a lot of overlapping research methodologies that are very popular. You may have heard about action research. You may have heard about participatory action research, or read about practitioner research, self-study, and more. We're excited to see that in these various qualitative research paradigms, that the educator, the teacher, the person carrying out action is at the center of these methodologies. This is what distinguishes these methodologies from many other methodologies. The researcher is actually considering their own context and their own environment. Some of the action research that you may read about, or practitioner research that has been out there for many years, is not necessarily critically oriented. So I want to help you understand what we mean by critical. And that is really where we feel you need to be looking, and where we're looking. Critical could actually be replaced by the word, perhaps, transformational. It is research that seeks to bring positive change. It is not simply research that seeks to replicate or to describe, but rather to make a positive difference. So we have looked at, throughout our collection, situations where social justice has really been central in our work. We've been considering how we can do our work differently. As such, we can think about action research as social justice. Some may think about action research for social justice. So if you think about these prepositions, they're very important in determining the orientation. But to conclude, we as authors sharing our action research are very central to this, and we have all shared the goal of thinking about action research for social justice and for positive change and transformation. I'm going to pass the baton to Srimali Harith, our co-editor, who will be speaking about our methodology.
Hello, everybody. Nice to see so many of you joining us from different parts of the world. And I'm sure everybody's in different time zones. And I think it also reflects the kind of work that we do at the NCAD. That's the community of us who actually put this book together. So when we conceptualize this book, it has been in the making for a long time. Actually, we had our initial discussions about this book when I was finishing my doctorate in 2015 in Toronto. And now we see everybody is in different parts of the world, in different places. What we wanted to do was to actually think of a methodology that resonated with who we were as a community, which was an international group of educators, activists, practitioners, researchers who were working at grassroots level. And the chapters, each presenter would actually represent different places, that they come from. We wanted the methodology also to resonate the kind of work we did, who we were. And that's why we chose auto-ethnography. So each of the chapters, as the presenters present, you would see their auto, duo, or multi-ethnographies. Auto-ethnographies allowed us to self-narrativize and helped us to kind of recall, reflect on work that we had done. We were doing not only what we were doing right now, but also reflect on work that we've done, how we've grown over the years, but also kind of reflect on ways in how we addressed issues of inequity, social justice that we were experiencing in our workplaces, and what we at a bottom-up as a bottom-up process did to address these inequalities. I'll leave you with a quotation from the book, which we hope you will purchase and read, about duo-ethnographies. Duo-ethnographies encourage educators and learners to undertake an auto-ethnographical examination of themselves using the researcher as the research site. Over to you, Amir.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Amir Kalan. I'm an assistant professor at McGill University's Department of Education. I've had the pleasure of working with the NCARE community as a member and as one of the co-editors of our book. I briefly speak about neoliberalism and how the concept is used in our book. Most forms of action research are mobilized as a form of professional development that can help teachers improve the pedagogical practices. This understanding of action research is based on the assumption that the problems in our educational settings are mainly because of teachers' imagined lack of skills. In our conversations in NCARE, we realized that most of the issues that we were wrestling with as practitioners were in fact problems with institutional practices rather than a gap in teachers' knowledge. In the book, we identified the currently dominant institutional culture that undermines teachers' practice as neoliberalism. I invite you to read the book to see how we describe our understanding of neoliberalism and neoliberal education. Here, though, briefly, I list some neoliberal practices and policies that have impacted educational structures. So some of these policies include defunding public services, privatization of publicly funded institutions and industries, financialization of Western economies and devaluing production and manufacturing, establishing a form of new imperialism facilitated by international organizations such as the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, launching military interventions in order to create and maintain a global neoliberal market, and destroying the environment as a result of profit-oriented energy policies and other industrial practices. So what are some of the direct implications of these measures for education and educational structures? So here again, because I have limited time, I just introduce a number of themes that whose echoes actually you're going to hear when chapter contributors talk about the projects. So some of these implications for education are cutting public school funding, commercialization of knowledge and education, corporatization of higher education, a new form of linguistic imperialism under the disguise of theories such as the global village and the end of history, eradication of native knowledges, philosophies, and pedagogies, and creating war zones and environmental damage, leading to actually physical destruction of educational settings and mass migration of students. So with this list, I end my brief presentation here and invite you to just find the connections in the projects that the presenters are going to talk about with the theoretical framework and methodology that we introduce in the introduction.
Over to you, Claudio.
Thank you, Antoinette. Hello, everyone. Thanks for the Plurilingual Lab friends for having us today here. I'm going to talk about the chapter 2, which is called NCARE, a Network of Critical Action Researches in Education, Processes and Realizations. This is a chapter that we have written collaboratively with Antoinette Gagné and Yesid Ortega. And this is a multi-ethnography that basically approaches not only us, ourselves, from an intersectional lens, but also the entire NCARE community, which is made up of basically educators from all over the world and who have engaged in criticality in challenging this neoliberalization in education in diverse settings and circumstances. And so to build basically this chapter, we drew on our convergences and divergences that emerged from the enactment of action research and on our own experiences within the anchor community. Antoinette, as the convener, basically since the inception of the community, and Yesid as a permanent collaborator since then as well. And in my case, as part of this contribution, I'm a more recent member who landed in this group and had to, make sense of the idea that actual change is possible. And so, in terms of the chapter content, first, the chapter, as I said, is a multi-ethnography, and it's about the evolution of the anchor group. We describe the origins, the evolution of this international community of educators that, as Antoinette said, began in 2014, like 8 years ago and counting. And in the chapter, we also look at the evolution of those changes through time up to now. So this longevity becomes one of the main qualities that is at the core of this chapter. We also discuss in this chapter patterns of participation, our sense of cohesion in the group that actually pivots around the collaborative and individual action research initiatives that you will be listening to in the coming, interventions. And that all of them challenge these ideas of neoliberalism that Amir has just bring into the discussion. I want to highlight basically the idea of cohesion as a quality of the community and collaboration as the binding component. And this is basically enacted through several components, like the topics we bring to discussion in our monthly meetings, the individual endeavors in their own, international settings of the members of the anchor group. And well, to finish, I like to add basically that the value of this chapter, looking at it with time perspective now, is that it gives a point of reference as to how the neoliberalization of education can be challenged through collectivism and by highlighting the voices and conversations that usually have no space in those settings. That's my intervention. Thank you.
Thank you. Srimali?
Sorry, I got lost in the screen. So my chapter is titled Criticality and Inclusivity in Teacher Education, a personal journey of growth and transformation. This is an autoethnography where I reflect on work that I had actually been doing for about 10 years. For the last 5 years, I was living and working in Sri Lanka. So in this chapter, I reflect on some of the work that I had done with teachers and my own students from the Postgraduate Institute for English at the Open University. So this was, before I talk about the contents of the chapter, this is an autoethnography where, for me, that was my first experience of writing an autoethnography. And I found it extremely challenging because autoethnography means you put yourself, the author, in the center stage. You become the voice, you're the data, you're analyzing yourself. In a way, you also make yourself very vulnerable. But as a thinking and a writing process, I found it to be extremely powerful. As a teacher educator, it helped me to look at myself very critically at what I did, the people I worked with, the context I worked in, which was a very competitive context of education, which was very competitive with high stakes examinations, where teachers were most often at gunpoint to produce results and teach. So in this chapter, what I do is I reflect on a range of different projects, assignments, projects, and also teachers that I worked with who actually worked with rural, very, very marginalized communities, and reflected on ways in which teach education could be made much more equitable, accessible, and also ways of empowering teachers. Because I work in a university, but how do you actually empower these teachers so they could actually go and empower these learners without actually getting in trouble? So that's my chapter. It's a self-reflective process of my own practices.
Thank you. Andres.
Well, thank you very much. I want to thank you, Professor Dr. Angelica Galante, as well as the Plurilingual Lab partners, McGill University. I'm speaking from Cali, Colombia. This is traditionally known as the territory of the Calimas, Jamundíes, Viríes, and Gorrones. Basically, in this ethnography, what I intended to do was to reimagine English as a foreign language teacher education by discussing 3 pedagogical projects, 2 murals and 1 iterative performance, which I carried out with my pre-service students teachers of the foreign languages program at Universidad del Valle, where I teach. This is part, of course, of a bigger political pedagogical project where I seek to challenge the written academic text as the highest form of cognitive achievement, being in line with indigenous epistemologies where weaving, dancing, painting, it's also considered as some forms of writing and cognitive representations, high order thinking skills in that sense. Of course, trying to also address the linguistic bias or verbocentrism in communication, where we tend to think of communication as primarily a linguistic act, particularly a graphic or verbal act. And of course, this prescription where where our language learning activities, they are designed to mirror the linguistic tasks of standardized testing, like the TOEFL IBT. And of course, I try to, as some of my colleagues have mentioned, to position myself not as the possessor or conveyor of the episteme and techne in the languages classroom, but actually as one, learner with my students. So I describe 3 pedagogical projects, 2 murals, where we seek to, learn other forms of reading, other forms of writing, taking collective responsibility, using the public chronotype of the wall as something not only public, but where we can actually challenge the various structures of the languages classroom. In addition, we carried out an iterative performance where what we wanted to do was to question the deep chauvinism and the different forms of oppression that women have lived, particularly in the province where I'm from. So we basically interrogated gender politics. And at the end, what we wanted to do was to recast foreign language teacher education away from anthropocentric views. We wished to undermine the very institutions and cultural production practices that constitute our field, that is to open language, to open what we mean by communication, by reading, by writing, and text, in order to advance, coexistence and mutuality, to fight off neoliberalism as well as other forms of colonization. So that's basically what my chapter is about. And again, thank you very much.
Thank you. Amir.
Sure, yeah. The chapter that I co-authored with Dr. Michelle Troberg from University of Toronto, Mississauga, is an ethnographic dialogue between me and Michelle as two of the instructors of a large credit-earning online course in a high-ranking Canadian university. Through this conversation, and yes, actually the chapter is written in dialogue format, we share how we, as practitioners, conducted a critical action research project in order to fight back against the constraints resulting from the online format of the course, which was an English grammar course, and our kind of strategies to deal with the large number of students, which in this course could be up to 1,000 students every semester, actually. So in our chapter, we discuss how profit-oriented neoliberal business models, which are currently adopted by higher education, appear to prioritize enrollment over pedagogical quality. In our chapter, we write about the actions we took to create an online critical pedagogy as an antithesis to sociocultural and socio-political alienation that the students experienced in our course. We conducted our research prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, yet our findings are still relevant today because online teaching has become more or less accepted as a legitimate form of education and as a result, a legitimate source of revenue. In our chapter, we discuss how our action research project help us reflect on some questions like the questions that I share with you. So how can teachers in online education, how can teachers make better sense of students' online identities? How can we identify and invite students' online communities into our everyday teaching and learning practices? What are some possible characteristics, some online community engaged learning? What should an online social justice pedagogy look like? With current online textual possibilities of multimodality, mixing and remixing, how should our assessment strategies change to reflect a reasonable understanding of digital textual practices? We felt that reflecting on these questions was necessary if we wanted our course to be something more than a course of more than a course which is really treated as a source of profit for the university. So I invite everyone to read the book and to read our chapter as well. Thank you.
And now I'm going to invite the authors who will be presenting in the next group to turn on their camera so that we can see you. And I invite you to comment or make connections to some of the core concepts. So jump in if you would like to say something as part of this interlude. I wonder if Hee-Jin or John or Monica or Mama, you would like to begin?
Thank you, Antoinette, for inviting us to comment. So yeah, just to briefly comment on perhaps the emphasis of criticality in critical action research that Antoinette actually stressed at the beginning. I would say the critical orientations in all of our critical action research that this book includes really how can I say helped us seek positive and transformative change from the struggles and tensions that all researchers and teachers encountered in their educational structure and practice. And I would say the NCARE community and also this critical action research lens that is like a lens of methodology and also as a theoretical lens, I would say helped us orient these tensions, in particular the tensions, the challenges influenced by neoliberal ideologies in our practice. We were able to reflect on and also actively and critically interrogate these tensions, and it became reason for our action and change.
Thank you, Hee-Jin. Are there any other authors who would like to comment?
Sure, I'll jump in. Thank you very much for those brief presentations, encapsulating so much of much broader projects that I've loved dialoguing with all of you about over the past many years. It strikes me that there are a lot of overlaps in some of the themes that are emerging. And so when I hear words like prescription and revenue, high stakes exams, pressure to produce results, even at gunpoint, Shrimali, I think you used that term. It's really exciting to see opportunities to push back against really very similar constraints that many of us are experiencing. And I think that a lot of this work is really about creating space for human relationships. Collaboration and community are also words and themes that emerge very strongly across these chapters. And so finding ways to be human beings and to make ourselves and our own positionalities and identities visible, and making all of ourselves vulnerable also. Thank you, Shrimali, again for that contribution about vulnerability. And centering that in these methodologies. Also creating space for human relationships, also creating space for alternative knowledges, diverse knowledges, including diverse linguistic practices and multimodality, diverse ways of knowing and being. I think these are all really strong themes that come through as we explore these themes of pushing back against some of the standardization of neoliberalism.
Thank you, Monica. Marlon or John, did you want to comment? Marlon?
Sure. Yes. So talking about overlap, I was thinking about Andres Valencia's work with regard to this idea of what kind of content we're supposed to teach, what kind of assessment is valued in education, and then moving on from the traditional print-based essay, which is something that I talk about in my chapter. Then Andres, with the creation of these beautiful murals to decorate and teach about the local realities at Universidad del Valle. This is something that goes beyond that neoliberal way of thinking of what needs to be taught, what needs to be valued. And it's something that is not only refreshingly counter-hegemonic, but it's also very, it disrupts the way of thinking that our colleagues quite often would expect us to fit in, because I imagine that maybe someone in your faculty, Andres, could be or could have thought, like, what is he doing? What kind of assignment is this? Like, how do you mark that? And those are very interesting questions to consider.
Do Mama or John want to add anything before we move into our next group of presenters?
I think the only thing that I agree with everything everybody has been saying, and very valid points. And I think just one thing that's kind of standing out to me is the impact of auto-ethnography. And it's something that I haven't done. And so what I really like about it is that it does create this center the lens, of course, on the teacher, and just I think it just allows this really rich form of data that can really just really create a very full picture that we can't get in other types of research. And so yeah, I think it's just the methodology I think really stands out to me, in addition to everything that everybody else has said. And Marlon, and you've given me thoughts too about being a writing instructor. What does that look like for me? we're going to change the modalities. But
thank you. And Mama, last but not least, did you want to add anything? It looks like maybe not. So I'm going to share the screen again, and we will now move to, in fact, the chapter written by Hee-Jin and John.
Thank you, Antoinette.
Yes,
So
I'm.
chapter 7, John McGuy here, my colleague and former colleague and also life companion. John and I, we wrote this chapter 7, titled A Dual Ethnography of Critical Action Research, Resisting the Neoliberal Order of EAP Teaching in Higher Education. This chapter is based on our collaboration in 2 cycles of critical action research that we conducted a few years ago while we were teaching in the same EAP program in a Canadian higher education. This chapter is based on our, this chapter we wrote in a form of a dual ethnographic narrative in a reflective and inquiry invoking manner. The chapter illustrates how we negotiated our practices to become more inclusive and critically oriented, although resisting the neoliberal ideologies circulating in our teaching context. Our teaching and planning were in constant yet evolving negotiation between research and practice and the cycles of critical action research, guided through the network of critical action research in education. In other words, our NCARE team here. Now, John will elaborate a few key points in our book chapter.
Sure. Yeah. So in our chapter, we focus on critical moments and tensions when we dealt with neoliberal ideologies. And so just to briefly touch on 2 key tensions that came up. In one instance, we were met with a surprising amount of teachers' resistance to incorporating learners' first languages in our EAP class. And it was sort of after a very tense planning meeting, and upon reflection, that we realized that what was happening is that there was a view that the first language would not serve, this is a view held by some, that the first language would not serve the best interests of our clients, in this case, our learners. And by including the first language, it would negatively impact our learner and really their parental buy-in into the program. And as a result, it would negatively impact our students, the client's capacity to be competitive in the global neoliberal market. Now, another tension which arose was a tension that was influenced by neoliberalism and colonial discourses, which attempted to delegitimize the knowledge and research of racialized instructors. And this marginalization of the instructor and her intellectual capacity served to, well, at least initially, to limit collaboration and really the dissemination of the first stage of our action research project. Now, these are kind of just 2 of the tensions that came up, but we really encourage you to read our chapter to find out how we are able to navigate and resolve these tensions through collaborative reflection and action. Now, to this end, we highlight 2 points. One, critical action research can serve as a means to demystify and resist the neoliberal order and discourses. And secondly, the critical action research can lead to opportunities to incorporate anti-racist, anti-colonial, and inclusive approaches in EAP teaching. That's it.
Thank you. Now over to Marlon.
Well, hello, everybody. This is Marlon. I co-authored this chapter with Elise. She was my ESL student back in the day at a post-secondary institution in Canada. And I was teaching this course that was pretty much a gatekeeping course for international students that wanted to do an undergraduate degree at this institution. So if they got the score that they needed, they could go on to the certificate that they wanted to complete or their bachelor's. And then I was reflecting about how we see and how we treat international students. And just in recent weeks, the Toronto Star, a local newspaper, was pretty much putting it in these words that we see them as cash cows, post-secondary institutions. And in this vision, in this neoliberal vision of education, these ESL programs are gateways to education and access to those international students, right? So what kind of program is it? We call it English as a second language, and I've talked to recruiters about this, and they want to keep using that label, even though I don't like it. And I've said this many times, because that's what people know, and that's what they can easily sell. And then what it is English for academic purposes, right? And what does it focus on? It focuses a lot on the traditional print-based text. We could summarize it a lot in essay writing, right? And then when we went through the pandemic at the onset of COVID-19, we knew that we needed much more than writing essays. We needed to function online. We needed all of those digital literacies. So a couple of things that my students were struggling with were plagiarism when they were writing those essays. They couldn't find their own voice in English. That was tough, like being critical because of their backgrounds. Maybe their way of thinking was that they should never question the teacher or someone who has written a book. So I tried to infuse different elements of that would allow learners to focus on their identities, to look inwards, to look at writing as a creative process, digital literacies as well. And then Elise and I, through a conversation, we discussed how this looked like as an intervention and how she felt about it. And I remember like the first class that we had at the beginning of the term, she's French and she speaks a wonderful English. And she told me like, what can I do to get rid of this accent? I have a very heavy French accent. And then by the end of the term, she said to me, you know what? I want to keep it because it's part of me. It's who I am and I love it. So it's a very interesting reflection for both of us, learning from each other. And it was also great to write it together because, you know, usually we don't pick our ESL students to co-author a scholarly article, and it was great. And I invite you all to read it.
Thank you. Now over to you, Monica.
So Monica, you got to unmute yourself, sorry.
Thank you. Greetings, everyone. I'm meeting with you today from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Hunkaminam-speaking Musqueam people, also known as Vancouver, British Columbia. In this duo ethnography, in which Upendo Molel, who unfortunately can't be with us today, and I dialogically explore some of the tensions and contradictions of the community-based transformative education work that we've been doing at Cheche Community Library in Tanzania since 2015. Cheche is a multilingual community learning center where we use translanguaging in everything we do, including language features from Ma, the dominant local language, Maasai language, Kiswahili, which is the national language of Tanzania and holds a certain amount of power, and English, a language of prestige and certainly a gatekeeper to all post-primary schooling and employment opportunities. We seek to embrace learners' full linguistic, semiotic, cultural resources, and also to position learners as authors, as knowers, and knowledge producers. In this context, we seek to push back against neoliberal logic characterizing the education system in Tanzania and elsewhere, as we've been discussing, by cultivating creativity and criticality, by emphasizing collaboration over competition and individualism, and cultivating dispositions to intervene in texts and the world, and to imagine and enact more equitable alternatives. So we've been doing critical action research in this context over several years and have observed some striking transformations, including pertaining to literacy engagement, shifting power dynamics, identity negotiation, and also unsettling of some entrenched language ideologies and language hierarchies. And you can read about some of these transformations elsewhere in previous publications about our critical action research. But what we really wanted to do with this chapter is to engage with some of the gnawing contradictions that we experience in this work. So in this duo ethnography, we tried to pull back the veneer of tidiness that characterizes a lot of academic writing, and to engage with the messiness and contestations that I think are inherent in some of this community-based work that we do. Upendo and my collaboration has been the backbone of Cheche's work since we founded Cheche Community Library in 2015. And as you can read in our duo ethnography, we have very different positionalities, very different ways of articulating the visions and contributions of Cheche. I'm a white Canadian researcher and educator, currently a doctoral candidate at the University of British Columbia, and have spent most of my adult life in Tanzania, including the community where we do this work. Upendo was born and raised in this community in northern Tanzania, and has a very different relationship with the local community, of course, and is also an exceedingly passionate and innovative educator, very keen to push back against the neoliberal education system that she grew up with, and to offer a new generation alternative forms of education. So one thing that really excites me about this chapter is the ways in which dual ethnography as a methodology enables us to put our very richly contrasting perspectives and experiences into dialogue in order to tell a fuller story of the successes, challenges, and contradictions that, you know, embedded in the transformative education work that we seek to do. So in this dual ethnographic inquiry, we explore three central questions or tensions. Firstly, our orientation to countering neoliberalism for us is really about addressing sources of poverty and injustice. And at the same time, we ask, how does this work contribute directly to the day-to-day struggles to survive of community members in this context? We explore ways in which our work may and may not directly be relevant to daily experiences of poverty in this context. Secondly, we explore ways in which, or the extent to which, our stated goals, our translanguaging approach, and our critical pedagogies may be relevant or may resonate with the local community. In this context of where neoliberal schooling has really taken hold, I think that if we had been offering tutoring towards exam preparation and monolingual English instruction, perhaps those educational contributions would have been embraced and understood a little bit more readily or quickly by the community. And so we explore some of the tensions surrounding, firstly, the moral, what I think is really our moral imperative to support these skills that will support excelling in exams and success in this neoliberal system, while also, of course, doing something that's more transformative at the same time. So we explore some of the dynamics surrounding that. And thirdly, we explore the extent to which our personal educational backgrounds might be relevant to the educational work in this community, and or might be inevitably alienating in certain ways in this context of rural poverty. Overall, our duo-ethnographic dialogues show how the deeply entrenched neoliberal ideologies and structures make our work both deeply urgent and highly contested.
Working on that.
The weaving together of our contrasting perspectives and experiences also demonstrates how collaboration across various dimensions of difference can be a central resource in navigating the contradictions and contestations of this transformation-oriented community work. Thank you.
Thank you. Mama, over to you.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening to you, wherever you're joining. Thank you so much to the Plurilingual Lab for hosting this book launch. My chapter 14, which is Mobilizing Pedagogical Agency for Mother Tongue-Based Bilingual Education, Mother Tongue, MTB in Ghana, is an ethnography. And in this ethnography, I discuss and I reflect on my participation in 2 teacher inquiry communities. So one in the global north and one in the global south. And in terms of the global north, I'm referring to the network of critical action researchers in education, which is mostly based in Canada with participants and colleagues from around the globe. And then the Afro-Literacies Education Network, which is based in Ghana. And so what my ethnography does is talk about how I use critical action research principles within the Afro-Literacies Education Network, which is a network of teachers who are teaching under mother tongue-based bilingual education policy in Ghana. And so I'm talking about how I use critical action research principles to challenge English-oriented neoliberal discourses that have made the teachers' practice inequitable for their students who are mostly linguistic minorities in primary schooling in Ghana. And so what my chapter does is to present this self-study because I look back at my experiences learning under the same regime of mother tongue-based bilingual policies where it was constantly frustrated because of an overarching English discourse. And so I did this self-study in collaboration with teachers in Ghana who were teaching Ga, the mother tongue Ga language in K-4 contexts. But they were faced with the same structural inequities, that persisted during the time that I was schooling and teaching in Ghana, in the language infrastructure that is necessary for teachers to teach in the local languages within a bilingual environment. And so when I talk about mobilizing pedagogical agency, essentially talking about the critical inventive stance that I took and that the teachers took to generate bilingual teaching and learning resources in the mother tongues that we're using to teach in this bilingual context. And talking about how we did this generation of teaching and learning materials in Ga in English to support their teaching of literacy in Ga as a pushback against the very capitalist publishing industry that seems as though it has been hijacked to serve only English language speakers because of its profitability. And so if you do read the chapter, you will notice that I also show examples of some of the products that were generated from this process, in which we went back to the drawing board as teachers, not just to talk about how we teach, but how we can make learning more equitable for minority language speakers by becoming not just teachers, but creators and publishers or authors and writers and producers of the materials that are necessary for making sure that our students acquire biliteracy in their mother tongues and then in the other language, in English. So I encourage you to read the chapter, and I hope that you enjoy it.
Thank you. I now invite all of the authors to turn on their cameras so that the group one authors can perhaps in this second interlude make some connections back to our core themes. There is Claudio, Shrimali, Amir, and Andres that I invite.
So can I? Oh, go ahead, Shrimali, please.
Can I? Yeah, it's a quick one, but a takeaway for me is I think something that I've learned from the process of writing the chapter, working with the community, is actually the importance of community and collaboration. So this book is a result of a very, very long relationship we've had over many, many years. We've had many conversations, and these chapters, although we've either written it on our own or with co-authors, these chapters take these shape and form because we've had critical friends along the way, critical conversations, heaps of peer editing going back and forth. I think so in terms of a publication, in terms of a research community, we've functioned very differently, but I think we've also supported each other a lot over the years as researchers, but also as practitioners. So I think for me, I think that's one of the biggest takeaways is, I mean, even moving forward is, I don't think it should be kind of a lonely journey, but collaboration definitely helps you to kind of propel yourself further.
Thank you. Amir?
Sure. Just very briefly, when I was listening to the presenters, I mean, there was an interesting contrast between how we treat international students, for instance, in a country like Canada, and how what is the condition of international students in their own contexts, for instance, in the examples that we had in Africa. So I was wondering if I mean, this is just a question, and it came to my mind. I thank you for your presentations for making me think about this. That is there a pattern of who we choose to come to Canada as an international student, and who we leave back home with lack of resources? So, and if there is a kind of global order that regulates these divisions, so who are the international students who come to us in Canada, and what happens when we train them? What happens to them? So when they go back, so what is their role in educational settings? And I might be wrong, but I feel there is a pattern of creating a neoliberal elite who are trained and who are sent back to different countries to sustain this system. So thank you for your presentations. This is a thought that came to my mind. I just wanted to share that with you.
Thank you. Claudio or Andres, would you like to comment? Claudio, go ahead.
Yep, I can. Well, I will draw on what Amir just said. I mean, the role of university as a colonial site, it's one that actually transmits much of these neoliberal ideologies and capitalist kind of thinking. And that's certainly a place that needs to be, observed and somehow disarticulated in these terms. But on the other side, for example, I listening to Mama and Andres. Also, like there is this practical side of, that the teacher will always say, okay, I know this is going on, and now comes the time of the how-to. And that's a moment that initiatives are like the ones that the anchor group basically is conducting in the world. It's interesting to see like how it shapes differently. And in this type of practices, for me, the importance is also thinking about like how to move in this neoliberal fog that actually makes things very invisible, and that prevents, us from coming up with changes and just like thinking of like out loud is the idea of the outcome over the process, and as a very anti-oppressive practice, because it's outcome oriented, immediately ends up being in standardization, in measurement. What is not measured does not progress, and so it comes all this architectural vocabulary as well that is very important also to look at through practice or praxis, like in more critical terms. And finally, like one last thing that's a reflection that also came from the intervention is the role of consciousness in that process, in my own research, my own teaching, my own practices. How are they actually promoting, sustaining, reproducing these neoliberal ideas? And in this an exercise that at least I try to keep constantly, alive in personally in my own practice.
Thank you. And Andres, did you want to comment as well?
Well, thank you very much. More than comment is, attempting to answer Teodoro Catalan question. Well, basically what I've learned, in my anti-oppressive, anti-discriminatory practices, anti-colonial practices, is that we have to stop, being, like in a hierarchical way. We have to stop relating in a hierarchical way, in a vertical way with our students. So, for example, in the iterative performance, where we challenge and we questioned and we problematized gender politics in Colombia, particularly in my province, I characterized, look, I didn't say disguise or dress up, I characterized a woman. So I, embodied myself and I prepared myself to, be part of women's struggles by dressing, by accompanying them in their fight. And this was, as a heterosexual, even, at some point displaying a hegemonic male identity, it was challenging for me. But then I realized how when you're able to position yourself, in the shoes of, that other, be it the similar other, the different other, you actually open an epistemic and ontological space where we can fight, all those colonial legacies. And of course, language language education particularly is one of those institutions that carries, a lot of these, let's say, legacies in everyday practices. So what I've, been doing in my work is to question, why do we, for example, believe that the academic essay is or should be, the highest cognitive, process in my course? Why should we, for example, limit the relationship with my students, with my socio-cultural, socio-political context, in certain ways? Why can't not we do something different to actually, subvert and transform those hegemonic relationships? So it's a how I can say this, an ongoing, process. It's not finished. It's what Claudio said, is more the process rather than the outcome, because in the process is where we, collectively transform. It's not my transformation only, it's not my students' transformation, it's our, in the plural. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm just going to close with a few comments in the final chapter. entitled Widening the Path to Challenge the Neoliberal Constriction of Language and Literacies Education. This was a multi-ethnography written by the three co-editors. The focus has really been on both our transformation during this journey of research and publication, but also really looking at the world around us. And we explore the many turns that we've experienced: the sociocultural turn, the critical turn, the ethnographic turn, and the emotional turn that really enriched our perspectives and our understandings of what research could be and how it could be transformative. I think collectively we have experienced how these many turns has led us to an even sharper turn where we are embracing critical race theory as one more important way to push back against these very powerful neoliberal forces in our multiple different contexts. So we will leave you with this, and now we're open to hearing from you. I will stop sharing so that we can actually see each other. And I know that there are some questions that you have perhaps posted already, but we do have a facilitator who will help us with this process.